I want to cry whenever I hear Marianne Faithfull sing As Tears Go By, because she's watching children play, and children always make me cry because I think that it's a big, bad world that's mean to children. It was mean to me, certainly, when I was a child. I cried when my mother left me with my grandmother. I cried when my grandmother left me at school. I cried when my father left the country and us forever. I cried when Stalin died. I cried when my mother cried, and that was often. Her tears were both specific and generic. They were specific when it was a matter of a man leaving her. They were generic when she cried because life and the world were unbearable. And sometimes she cried neither specifically nor generically, but deeper, like an animal. And those were not her tears. They were the tears of unfairness for being a woman, for being a Jew, for being punished for something she didn't know the name of. I sometimes cried with her like that, and those tears flowed through us on their way somewhere else. They were part of a river of tears that runs through our kind since the beginning of time. This river sweeps us all in its swell, and we stand in it keening, wailing, and arguing with something invisible in the language of lamentations. I rarely cry now. Sometimes I'm filled by love or sorrow, and I feel the tears rising, but I usually check them. I did cry when Romania overthrew the Ceausescu dictatorship, prematurely. I'm afraid that if I start crying, I'll never stop. Not for any particular or even generic reason, but for that animal reason that leads to the river of tears. In Romanian folk tales, the tears of young girls become flowers. But what happens to the tears of aging poets? They become sharpened spikes, rusted bollards, fishhooks, spears, barbed wire. Their tears are bitter. Keep the poets from crying. In my case, I started writing when I was 14 years old. I felt very much like an alien, but I didn't know why. I found out later it's because I was Jewish, growing up in a very quiet place under Stalinism, where real matters didn't get discussed, where history didn't exist, it wasn't talked about, where parents didn't talk about, in the presence of children, about anything true. So we had an assignment in school to write a poem about sounds animals make. And I went home and I did various quatrains and various animal sounds, and I had the perfect frog stanza. I mean, it was just, I got the frog. And then I read it to the kid below me, and he'd written a poem that was okay, but he wanted to buy my frog stanza. You know, and he offered me what was then an amazing amount of money, like 25 bani. You know, that's like the quarter of a leu, which is, you know, the bigger currency. And I said no. Yeah, so then I felt like, then I went to school and he got the first prize anyway. So it was both the beginning of my literary integrity and this sort of idea that I was going to write poetry, because there was something very interesting that happened when you did that. Here is a poem that deals with profound religious subjects called Defense of the Meek. The meek have taken Jesus to mean their turn will come. Jesus was merely stating a fact. The meek will inherit the earth. There are more of them. Or he may have been mean and the Buddhist and meant the meek will return to the earth over and over until they get it right. Sometimes translation is on the side of the meek, but never the commentary. You know, there was this sense that if you said anything, it was going to have consequences. So in a way, the Stalinist silence of the late 50s, early 60s, and the schooling in a kind of a Transylvanian mysticism gave me this idea that words made things, that they had consequences, and that in that way they were demiurgic. I mean, they were creative in the sense that when you made them, they made worlds. They made the world that they named. And so to be a poet, it was like Cesar Vallejo said, El poeta es un pequeño Dios. You know, the poet is a little god. I.e., you speak, you name the way that the gods named the world in the beginning. So it carried some of that, but all through the negative context of Stalinism, of silence, of lies, of people not. So it was both an act of rebellion and justice, you know, because I felt very strongly that there was an element of, you know, that you had of integrity that was involved, because you couldn't sell your poems. And then on the other hand, there was a demiurgic quality to it, which was to make something where there was nothing before. Last night at the relief benefit for Bosnia, 2 bishops on my right, 2 professors on my left. The beef donated by Marriott, cooked Bosnia style by the unwilling chef, is gristle with cloves, overcooked string beans. Archbishop Hannon blasts the world, the Europeans especially, for doing nothing. The Virgin of Medjugorje is on disputed land. The professor says in the 13th century, the West lost Kosovo to the Turks because of excessive piety. Men should not hide in monasteries, they should break down doors. I say there are no more bears in Sarajevo. There are no more bears in Sarajevo. After the gristle and the bishops, a very old woman asks for a ride. Last night, she says, at the Fairmont, at a similar occasion, the food was much better. In her 80s now, a first-grade teacher, she said, first grade is most important. Europe needs to go back to first grade. Damn the gristle, bring back the bears. It was a sense at the end of the 60s that we all had as a generation, without knowing at the same time that in the West, on the other side of the wall, on the Berlin Wall, there was also a young explosion, that something was happening with our generation on the other side, but we kind of figured it out because after a while tapes of the Beatles started coming in. Radio Free Europe and the Voice of America were bringing us all kinds of news. I mean, we heard of abstract art, for instance, and we could try to imagine it. I heard a little jazz on Radio Free Europe. They talk about, expressions that are really new, and that fit very much with what we were feeling that was happening. So I think in 1966, 1967, the Iron Curtain was actually gone. That's the moment when we felt generationally that we were much more connected to people our own age on the other side of the wall than to older people the older people we knew. And so this sentiment of like generational solidarity was all mixed in also with the sense that there was something new in the world. There was art, that there was something that was happening, And I think at that point all the ideologies went to hell. I mean, they just broke. The party was on the roof of the Chelsea Hotel above Shelley Winter's penthouse. A summer breeze started up. New York came to life in the evening. The girls began taking off their shirts to dance. I was in heaven. I felt so glamorous. I was 19 years old, and so was the world. I was but a year out of the old world, the ancient murderous world, dressed in black from head to foot, still mourning sorrows I was beginning to forget. The night was rose and soft. The girls were dancing bare-breasted. What better place to be, a young poet in the late century, dancing with a sleepy-eyed beauty with foam still clinging to her sea-fresh body. I closed my eyes. When I opened them, all the girls had vanished. I panicked. Had the barbarians come, made off with the women? No, said someone. It was rumored that Bob Dylan was visiting Leonard Cohen in his room, and all the girls went there. The barbarians were our heroes.